Fauci, the White House's top infectious disease expert, is scheduled to testify before the Senate tomorrow. Fauci is set to answer questions from the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee about reopening the country during the coronavirus pandemic. He will be doing so along with CDC Director Robert Redfield, Assistant Secretary for Health Brett Giroir, and FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn. Fauci is scheduled to testify remotely after going into, quote, modified quarantine following exposure to a White House staffer who tested positive for COVID-19. His Senate testimony comes after President Trump blocked him from appearing before a House committee to discuss spending on coronavirus testing. Wisconsin Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin sits on the Senate committee that Fauci testified before. She joins me now from Washington. Welcome, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Tanya. Thank you.
First off, what do you hope to learn from Dr. Fauci about the administration's coronavirus response?
You know, I'm going to press, as I have at every opportunity, on why they do not yet have a comprehensive national testing strategy, as well as the means to fully implement it. It seems to me that certainly they seem to have a testing strategy in the White House, but none for the rest of the country. And I hope that Dr. Fauci will give us some input on why they haven't unlocked the full power of the Defense Production Act to not only deal with testing, but also the personal protective equipment, or PPE, and other medical supplies and equipment that are needed to fight this pandemic. I've introduced legislation with my colleague Chris Murphy that would unlock the full power of the Defense Production Act to make sure that we are able to secure the sufficient amount of testing to begin to open up, as we all want to do.
Now, speaking of the Defense Production Act, we know the White House targeted the meat industry with that. And in your state of Wisconsin, there are 4 meatpacking plants with outbreaks of at least 85 coronavirus cases. You've criticized President Trump's use of the Defense Production Act to keep meat plants like these opened. Should workers have the right to choose not to return to work without consequence if they feel conditions are not safe?
You know, I would say that this White House has issued that order. At the same time, there's been a total failure of leadership for the very agency in charge of protecting workers' safety and health, otherwise known as OSHA, to put emergency temporary standards in place, enforceable, mandatory standards. I think that if that had been stood up in a timely manner, and it's not too late now, and I have legislation that would force this, you would be able to tell workers that their employers have to meet standards that can protect them in the workplace. But we should not put workers in the position of having to choose between their own safety and health and that of their families to go to work. Even in essential businesses, we got to be able to do both of these things at the same time. And really, I think that the president needs to lead in protecting workers at the same time as he pushes forward with his opening of various sectors of the economy.
And to follow up on that, you and Republican Senator Josh Hawley are calling for an antitrust investigation into the meatpacking industry. You say 4 companies control 85% of the beef production in the U.S., and 3 of those control 63% of pork production. So do you think that this consolidation led to worsened outbreaks of the coronavirus, one? And secondly, what should be done to remedy the situation?
Well, I think that the increased consolidation has certainly led to more dangerous circumstances, as these 4 meatpacking companies that are behemoth, really, as they bought more and more of the smaller processors, they consolidated a lot of their operations into bigger facilities, bigger plants, where social distancing is very challenging, and it seems to me, have not done the planful work that responsible employers would do in order to permit socially distancing, not just on the plant floor, but in places like break rooms and narrow corridors or locker rooms. There's many things they can do in addition to providing employees with adequate personal protective equipment. But the other thing that this consolidation has created is incredible political clout. And, you wonder if they use that clout to get this order from the President of the United States to order folks back to work without getting the accompanying worker safety standards issued in an enforceable and mandatory way. I want to just remind folks that right now, CDC and OSHA have guidelines that are voluntary standards. This is not enough during a pandemic.
And Senator, your name often comes up as a potential running mate for Joe Biden. Have you been in contact with the Biden campaign about vetting, and would you join his team if asked?
Well, I am in regular contact with the Biden campaign. I want to make sure that that Vice President Biden becomes the next president of the United States. That said, I have participated regularly in surrogate activities on all sorts of issues in this virtual campaign age, and advised the campaign extensively on our experience in Wisconsin, where in 2016 Trump narrowly won, but I had a much greater margin of victory in 2018. But I keep my counsel with the Vice President's campaign private.
Of course. And if you would, what do you make of the sexual assault allegation against him from his former staffer, Tara Reade? Do you find her story credible?
I believe that every woman deserves the right to be heard and to have her story examined and analyzed. I also have heard Vice President Biden very directly asked about these allegations, deny them firmly, and go the next step of saying if you can find any complaint that was ever filed in the Senate against him, that he clears that for public disclosure. And I agree with him, and I think that is the next step.
All right. Well, Wisconsin's 7th congressional district is set to hold a special election tomorrow. Up to 67 COVID-19 cases were tied to last month's primary. So do you believe an election can be safe and secure if people have to choose between social distancing and voting at the polls?
Yeah, so the April 7th election was, it was hard to watch the lines, people standing in line for several hours in some cases in order to access the right to vote in person. And no voter or poll worker should have to choose between risking their health and exercising their constitutional right to vote. I am heartened that in the 7th Congressional District in northern Wisconsin, there has been a very exceptional demand for absentee ballots, and local clerks are working very hard to fulfill all of those requests. But we know some people will end up voting in person. And I think it speaks volumes for the need to ramp up vote by mail and expanded absentee ballot access throughout Wisconsin and throughout the United States. We have statewide primaries and a statewide general election in November coming up. And we need to be ready because we know this pandemic will not have passed by then.
All right. Well, Senator Tammy Baldwin, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.